Hi, everyone. If we haven't met, I'm Ceels and I work at Black Box Co. Black Box is a startup that's working with the northern beef industry to help farmers use the data they collect more efficiently with an eye towards improving sustainability and traceability. So at Black Box, we're working on machine learning models for some of the cow data, which means that I've been learning some Python. And when the Python course went through arrays, the way that they approached using the index to access an array reminded me of how it was taught in a lot of the Ruby tutorials, which I didn't find very straightforward. So I want to talk about a different way of thinking about indexes and accessing arrays that seem easier than the ways I've seen it taught. But first, I will rant about octopuses, and then after I'll ask a question about ranges. So to recap, this is going to be a short talk, starting with an octopus rant, talking a little bit about how to think about an index, and then a question about ranges. Now, I have said indexes, and if you say indexes, there is nearly always someone who will correct you and tell you it's actually indices. And indices is a word that has taken on meaning beyond just being a plural of index in English, but indexes is also a valid plural of index. And this is where the octopuses come in. Because the plural of octopus is not octopuses, it is octopi, because octopus is from Latin and changing the ending to I is how you pluralize Latin US ending words, which is true most of the time. But actually the plural of octopus is not octopi, it's octopodes or octopodes, depending on things. Because octopus is actually an ancient Greek word, and that is how you make the plural in ancient Greek. But the word octopus didn't exist in Latin. The word for octopus in Latin was polypus, or many-legged. And they used it to refer to squid and cuttlefish, and also insects, I think. And it also referred to cancer in the nose. I don't know why, but this is where we get the word polyp from. So the word octopus also didn't exist in ancient Greek. The word in ancient Greek was also polypus, and the Romans borrowed from them because the Romans thought the Greeks were pretty cool. The word we have now came from scientists naming things scientifically with modern Latin in either the 16th or the 18th century. And they took the word for 8 and the word for feet from ancient Greek, and they kind of mushed them together to get octopus, and then they Latinized it, which means octopus is not an ancient Greek word, so you don't have to say octopodes, and it's not a Latin word, so you don't have to say octopi. And it is as much an English word as any other English word, so you can absolutely say octopuses. Or you can hope that you never have to refer to more than one octopus at a time and avoid the issue altogether. Fun fact, unrelated, for a very long time, my brain thought the Rails logo was like an octopus arm reaching off into the future. But to come back from octopuses, we're going to talk about indexes. So index was a Latin word. So there's more of an argument for using indices as a plural. And as I mentioned, indices has more of a life of its own in English. But we don't use the rest of the declension for the dative or the genitive of index. So go ahead and say indexes if you want to. And if anyone gives you a hard time, you send them to me. So index was a Latin word, and it meant one who points out or a discoverer. And we still have this in English for things like the index of a book, telling you where to find something in a book. And I'll come back to the idea of someone who points things out in just a second. Okay, so this is an example of a beginner's tutorial in Ruby that is explaining how indexing works in an array. And I do have a link to this tutorial, but I didn't want to put it up on the slide because I don't want to say that this tutorial is bad, because it isn't. So I haven't put the link up to be oh, bad tutorial, because I don't want that to be the message about this. I do have it. If you're super curious, I can send it to you. But I feel like a lot of the tutorials conflate the index with counting the elements of the array, and then they tell you to -1 from the element so that you can work out what the index is, which I think makes it harder to get your head around understanding how accessing the elements with an index works. So if we take this example, tiger is the third element. So you -1 from 3, and that's the index where you can find tiger in the array. But rather than trying to think about offsetting the count of the elements, I think it's easier to count the divisions between the elements. So I like to think of the little divisions between the elements as the index. And I've put 3 on the end for completeness, because if there's an imaginary thing at the start, then there should be an imaginary thing at the end. And so now you've got the index pointing the way to the element that you're looking for. This is the section on accessing elements in an array from Ruby docs. And I'm going to use the examples here to show you how I think about the divisions between the elements. So the first example is you want index 2 of the array. So you count forward from 0, 1, 2, and then you take the element that's after that index. The next one is if the index is 100, and if you count all the way up to 100, there's nothing after 100, after the index 100, so it returns nil. You can also count backwards in the array, and I feel like this makes it more symmetrical for when I'm thinking about indexes, because it works the same front and back. So you start from the end and you count back 1, 2, 3. And then you take the element that is after that index. Another way of getting things out of an array is that you're given the index first, and then you're given the number of elements that you want after that index. So again, you count forward from 0, 1, 2, and then you take the 3 elements that follow on after that index 2. And now we're getting into ranges. In this example, you have a range of indexes from 1 to 4, and you take the elements after those indexes. And you can also, in a range, count forward from one end and backwards from the other end. So you count forward 1 to get index 1, and then you count backwards 3, 1, 2, 3, and then, oh, I've got a cat. Then you take the elements after those indexes. But if you have 3 dots showing your range, you take your indexes that you've counted, 1, 2, 3, and it's like you're only taking the ones between 1 and 3. So if it's 2 dots, you take the elements after all the indexes, and if it's 3 dots, you take the ones between the front and the end of the indexes. I don't know how to think about this, and I find it frustrating because, like, more dots, more things, fewer dots, fewer things. That's how it should work, and it's opposite. So my question is, does anyone have a good trick for remembering which way around the range is supposed to go? Because I have to look it up nearly every time. So there we have it, a rant about octopuses, a way of thinking about indexes, and a question about how to remember which way around ranges work. And in the last meetup, I think I mentioned that I was going to be looking after a friend's corgi puppy, and this is the puppy. So if anyone has any questions or an answer about my problem with ranges, I would love to hear them.
The octopuses bit was really interesting.
So like I don't have a good answer, but like I just want to empathize and say I share your frustration that like the more dots doesn't
more dots.
I'm trying to come up with ways to convince my brain, like being like, oh, it's an extra, so like an extra stop, like it's a full stop, like it's stopped sooner, but it doesn't feel right.
It doesn't feel right to me.
I can add a joke in that if that helps. Yeah. So 3 dot means love triangle. which is not acceptable. 2 dot means direct love.
Okay.
I'm just trying to think about maybe the number of dots is sort of like, I'm thinking about each of those dots is like the intensity of the microscope, like how much you're zooming in. And so maybe you have like, well, at 3 dots, you've zoomed in even further to, but yeah, I agree that it feels weird that 3 dots equals a narrower range.
Is there anything you can
I
write?
do like the microscope though.
Yeah.
I wonder if 2 dots was just the only sort of range method that came with Ruby originally, and then they added an extra one to be, you know, between these rather than inclusive. And it was just, you know, like 2 dots is taken, so it's got to be 3 dots.
Well, that's what Ruby 3 should have been about. That's like Ruby 3, we've renamed it because of the 3 dots. Yeah, it would be interesting to go through the original.
I'm Googling right now.
Yeah, the original reasoning. Who was responsible for what we
That's actually really accurate. It really was that they tacked on that syntax after the double dots was in place.
And I can stop Googling because I couldn't even see who that was because I've got speaker mood on. But someone backed me up with my hypotheses, so I'm taking it.
That's awesome.
I have a linguistics question. Is there anything that is pluralized in regular discussion that is incorrectly pluralized? Like, what's your pet peeve word that people say that we should be saying differently if we actually followed the laws of Latin and ancient Greek?
If this is to me, then I think we shouldn't follow the laws of Latin and ancient Greek. We should have a grammar that describes what people say, not what people should say.
But that's how you end up with the current state of English.
What's wrong with it?
Impressive thing. Also, Latin hasn't changed a lot in the last, let's say, 2,000 years, less than that. But so it makes sense to have all these rigid rules for Latin, but English was never much like Latin, and it gets less and less like Latin every day. So we need better grammar. More appropriate grammar, maybe.
I like how you're talking about the rules, and especially in a programming kind of thing, but rules for language, because the rules have gone out the window. If you've listened to anybody under the age of, I don't know, 20 talk.
They have really, really complicated and consistent rules, though. They're just different